Good morning. Before we start, will those in Zoom land please be sure to mute and mute yourselves, and we'll begin with the Prelude with music by Bob and Karen on Zoom. Good morning. Welcome to the Carbondale Unitarian Fellowship, a member congregation of the Unitarian Universalist Association, sharing the good news of Unitarian Universalism with people throughout the river region. Our good news is a message of love, freedom, reason, respect, and justice as the basis for religious community. I'm Gene Basanta. I'm a member of several committees, including the Sunday Services Committee. And this morning, I am the Sunday Services Facilitator. We are a congregation of open minds and open hearts, a congregation of all ages, all colors, all genders, all abilities, all kinds of wealth, and all kinds of love. If you're a newcomer this morning, we're really glad that you're here with us. We welcome you, and we'd ask you to fill out one of these blue cards. They're out at the table as you come in the front door, so you can leave your information and we can be in touch with you if you'd like. And if you're a newcomer on Zoom, we'd ask you at some point during the service to put your contact information in the chat, and so that we can be in touch with you if you'd like. Due to the rise in COVID cases in the area, we won't be serving coffee after the service here, but there'll be an online coffee hour, and so those of you who are at home and make your own coffee, you can have coffee during the coffee hour. We can't here. Now, as we've been doing with each Sunday service, if you'll switch to gallery view, wherever that wherever you click on your device, so we can wave and greet each other across the electronic universe. It's really great to see everybody. It's great to be together. Reverend Sarah, of course, is on her sabbatical. She's just past the middle of her sabbatical. And just as spring is coming, right, Sarah will be coming back in April. So she's like the harbinger of spring, or whatever you want to say. So we're looking forward to having her back with us. But a little pat on the back to the Sunday Services Committee, and particularly to Rhonda. I think our services have been really good, and I think this morning's service is going to be a really, really good service, because we're going to explore the lifetimes and words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Of course, tomorrow is Martin Luther King Day, and let's begin with lighting our chalice, a symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith and tradition. And of course, those of you who are at home, you're invited to light your own chalice. Now I have to find page 5 here. Yes. The chalice lighting this morning is by G. Woods. As we kindle the flame of our community, let us call to remembrance those who inspire us, those who offer their own flames through humanity's darkest hours, lighting the way for others to see what yet may be done and better ways to do it, for peace, for justice, for love, for the greater good of all. I've lit the chalice, and now with intention, I'll put a pebble in our bowl of water, letting it ripple out beyond our knowing. All those who at home who would like to do so are invited to drop a pebble in their bowl of water at home. And of course, those of you who are here, Toby's going to do it for me. Those of you who are here during musical portions of the service are invited to do as Toby has done. Now is the time in our service when we share joys and sorrows in fellowship, a time of personal milestones, of emotional, spiritual, personal significance. Some of us come today with heavy hearts, with concerns, with something weighing on their mind. And sometimes, as we all know, if you share that weight with others, it's perhaps a little less burdensome. And so those of you who would like to hear and on Zoom have a sorrow or a joy to share, come up or raise your hand or on Zoom, and we'll do so.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Kosmicki. I'm just sharing a concern, and Charles, I'm placing on his last name, Sarah Starbuck's husband. He is doing better. He was quite sick for a while. He had to have, but anyway, he is improving. He's doing better. He was for a while, he had to be hospitalized 3 different times. He was having some episodes of syncope, and those are getting fewer, and he's getting more strength. So there's good news, but they're still concerned. But they're hoping that they can be at services soon, and he'll keep improving. So just want to give an update.
Thanks, Rhonda. Laura?
Hi, my name's Laura Basanta, and I'd like to read a letter from the Reverend Robert Gray that was sent here, January 7th. My name is Reverend Robert Gray, and I'm on the Spiritual Care Board at Carbondale Memorial Hospital. As an online chaplain, I'm very aware of the pressures and stresses placed upon doctors and nurses at our hospital. I would like to ask that your church include a prayer this coming Sunday, January 16th, for our healthcare workers. They need to know that we appreciate them and pray for them. This letter has been sent to all the churches in Carbondale that I have addresses for. One nurse told me that when they went into nursing, they went into it to help people get well. He said, quote, "Now I leave one room in the COVID unit and enter another to see if they're still alive. They need our prayers. Sincerely yours, Reverend Robert W. Gray."
So perhaps we can all say a prayer, a reflection to ourselves in support of healthcare workers. Anyone else? Jim? You want to go? Watch the cord there.
I'm Jim Todd. On Christmas Eve day, the guy that introduced me and Jeannie and was somebody that I'd grown up with passed. His name was Walter Baker. He spent over 20 years as a preacher in the Presbyterian Church in El Dorado. They arranged a blind date for us at Jeannie's apartment. We went to see Christmas lights. On March 9th, I asked her if she thought it was time we talked about getting married. She said she'd been thinking of mid-September. So we did that.
Anyone online, on Zoom?
I had something.
Go ahead, Jess.
Just about 15 minutes ago, my oldest friend Sarah, who's in Wisconsin, and her partner, my friend Laura, texted. They're to get married in mid-February, and they set that date so that Laura's mom could potentially be witness to that. But Laura's mom passed away early this morning, and they were with her. They knew that she was dying, and before she went, they were able to put on their wedding dresses so that she could see them in their wedding attire. And so I just ask that you think of Lil is Laura's mom and their family, and particularly my friends Laura and Sarah.
Thank you, Jess. Anyone else here or online? Any more sorrows or concerns that anyone wants to share?
Share one. Hi.
Johanna has one.
Hi.
Hello, Joanna.
I think many of you already know, but I'm currently looking for connection, even though virtual, but it's still good to see you. I'm grieving. 18 days ago, my dad died. And I think most of you probably remember that while I was there in person before this whole pandemic thing and everything, that my mom passed away 3 years ago. So it's definitely a trying time, or these are trying times for me. I'm glad to have my fur baby here to cuddle, and I'm glad to have your group and your congregation to reach out to, albeit virtually. It's already helpful. So thanks for having me today.
We are glad to have you with us, Johanna. Any other sorrows or concerns from anyone here? If not, we'll transition to joys, because the flip side of sorrow is joy. Some of us may have reasons to celebrate, feelings of joy, gratitude. And again, sharing those can multiply the joy, can multiply the gratitude as you share it. So if anyone has a joy, a gratitude, a cause for celebration that they'd like to share, please come forward and state your name and share with us.
Hi, everyone. My name's Aliza Barabee-Sitars, and I don't come here often, but I hope to. But I wanted to just have a moment to celebrate my friend Annie in the back. She's visiting from Fort Wayne, and I'm excited because she's starting a new chapter, and I just wanted to have an opportunity to have people send positive thoughts to my friend Annie.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Positive thoughts coming. Anyone else? Anyone on Zoom with a joy? I think Roy.
Hi. Yeah, I have something. It's a joy. It's for the whole fellowship. It involves the 2024 and 20 years more campaign. You remember we started that back in October. It's a 3-year campaign to raise $100,000 for our long-term maintenance. On that committee are Miriam Link Mullison, Jerry Malumbi, Jan Eisenhard, Cheryl and Tom Robinson, and myself. And through the end of December, I'm proud and really excited to announce that we have received pledges from 9 pledging units out of 89 in the tune of $31,560.
Yay.
There will be more information in a bulletin coming out next week. So thank you, everybody. Woohoo!
Thanks for sharing that. That's cause to celebrate. It sure is. Isaac.
Hello, Isaac Ludington. I shared a couple months ago that my partner and his mom got COVID, and we were a bit worried about that for several reasons. But I was waiting to kind of share until we made sure there were no apparent long-term effects, and they both seem to be perfectly fine, so we are very happy about that.
Indeed, that is reason to be happy. Anyone else? Anyone online?
Glenn had one, and John.
Good morning, Glenn.
Mute myself. Good morning, everybody. Oh, I had remembered a joy just seeing some faces. I mean, I haven't seen a lot of your faces, but I see Al there, and we ran into each other. Hi, Al. And just recalling back the joy of seeing someone's face. I had run into Joyce Daisy at the co-op. I hadn't seen her in a while, and it just brought me such joy. We're standing there talking in our mask, and here comes Al, who I had to recognize through his mask. I wasn't quite sure it was him, and I didn't think he wasn't quite sure it was me, but we looked at each other long enough to realize that under the mask we knew each other. And then he came over, so we kind of had a 3-way Unitarian congregation right there, didn't we? And in the parking lot of Co-op, and that was very joyful. So lovely to see. Protect you, Joanna. It really brought a smile on my face to see your face, because I hadn't seen yours in quite a while either. So that was kind of the first thing. So that's my joy. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. It's good to see you. Anyone else with a joy that they'd like to? Any more online? John? Good morning, John.
Good morning, Gene, and good morning, everyone. I am home after some major surgery at Barnes Jewish on the 7th. I want to thank sincerely everyone who has reached out with cards or online with words of love and support. They mean the world to me. I'm home for at least 6 to 8 weeks to recuperate so that we can then go to the next round or rounds of surgery, wherever those may lead. But I just wanted to take this opportunity to send my love to you all and thank you for all of your kind words and support.
It's great to see you, John. You look good. It's good to see you smile. Anyone else who'd like to share a joy?
Bob Swenson.
I'm going to embarrass Karen, but I want to. My joy is that we are both playing music together today, and that she's having a good time and playing music. And we missed the UFO, but we have each other, so that's pretty cool.
It is. It is. And the music has been, and I know the rest of it will be great. Anyone else? Okay, so sorrows and joys have been shared out loud, but perhaps some have been kept silent and quiet in our hearts for all that have been shared and all that are kept inside. Let's observe a moment of silence.
I want to remind everybody that people came to freedom through Southern Illinois, through Massac County, metropolis area, coming out of the rivers, out of the Tennessee River and out of the Cumberland River, crossing the river into Southern Illinois. And the drinking gourd was the Big Dipper. At night, they were following the Big Dipper, and that's where the term drinking gourd came from. Follow the drinking gourd, follow the drinking gourd. The old man is a-waiting to carry you to freedom. Follow the drinking gourd, follow the drinking gourd, follow the drinking gourd. The sun comes up, the first quail calls. Follow the drinking gourd. Follow the drinking gourd, follow the drinking gourd. The river bank will make a mighty good road. Follow the drinking gourd, follow the drinking gourd, follow the drinking gourd. The dead trees will show you the way. Follow the drinking gourd, follow the drinking gourd, follow the drinking gourd. Left foot, right foot, traveling on. Follow the drinking gourd, follow the drinking gourd, follow the drinking gourd. The river
our fellowship, we share lots of things. We share our time, efforts, talents, spirit, and of course, our funds. We share with this fellowship for the fellowship and for the needs of those in the greater community. As we will hear in just a couple minutes, our January recipient for Social Action Month of Sundays is the Diversity and Inclusion Mental Health Fund. You can donate to that fund or donate to the amount you've pledged, or donate in any other aspect of the fellowship that interests you by writing a check and sending it to Cuff or by PayPal. A link is in the email that was sent out for this morning's services, and it's also posted in the chat online for this service. Either way, please put in the memo line or on the second, I think it's the second page in PayPal, where you're directing your donation. And of course, all forms of donation are very greatly received. So please join me now in our Unison offering reading. The words are on the screen. Freely have we received of gifts that minister to our needs of body and spirit. Gladly we bring to our church and its wider concerns a portion of this bounty. Thank you, Bob and Karen. Now, before we turn to our message for the day, looking at the life and words of Martin Luther King Jr., I wanted to welcome Grace Gunn, who is here this morning to talk to us a little bit about the mental health fund that students have created on campus. So please welcome Grace.
Good morning. How are you all today? That's good. Good to see you all. Good to see you. It's nice to visit another church in Carbondale. I've only the second church I've been to. I usually go to Hopewell. So it's really nice to see another church community in the town. Thank you for having me to speak briefly about this fund. So for starters, the Diversity and Inclusion Mental Health Fund was created in November of 2020. And essentially, I had been wanting to start something like that since I started attending Southern Illinois University, because at the high school I went to, we could get social work services for free, especially, of course, if you were referred to it. And you could stop in if there was ever a time that you just needed to talk and speak with a professional. And I realized that we did not have that here quickly when I started going here, because in the first month that I was here, I had lost one of my friends. He had been killed, and I'm from in Chicago. And I realized I didn't have any free resource to use, and I was a first year student, so I didn't know that many people. And I realized the need for it very quickly. And talking to other friends that had come back from this, who were down here and were from the city and have been experiencing those same things, or didn't know if there was a trusted professional that they can talk to. And so after the Breonna Taylor's case, and we saw how there was just repeated racial tension and repeated racial injustices, and we did not have the spaces to be able to debrief about those things and discuss those things and discuss the traumas that we may be experiencing with those things. I worked with the interim vice chancellor of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we created this fund. And we went to other departments on campus to see who would want to donate, who would want to be a sponsor for it. And we raised about $5,000 to $6,000 to be able to serve students. The goal is to be able to give each student an opportunity for about 10 sessions. That's about how many sessions students use on average. And that's usually looked at as a full service. And of course, if there were situations where someone needed to be diagnosed, we would try to accommodate that so that they could keep using the fund. And of course, it is geared towards anyone that is a minority, low income, first generation student, LGBTQ, or experiences different abilities. And so we were able to use all of those funds last year. And of course, there was only about 30% of students on campus. So this year, there is a greater need for greater funds. Last semester, because of the overextension of the CAP Center, we just created the fund to be available for people that needed drop-in services, where you don't have reoccurring services with one specific therapist or counselor, but you're able to go in and seek the services at any time that you need in a different building on campus. But this semester, we are hoping to make it available for people that want to have recurring services with a specific therapist that they're designed to be with. So we do have commitments from the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and we do have a small commitment from the CAP Center itself, and of course, BAC and the undergraduate student government. And speaking of, just to describe what BAC is, because I'm sure some of you, since you are not students, would not know, Black Affairs Council is the governing umbrella organization for the Black organizations on campus. Our main goals are to advocate, protect, and serve the Black students of SIUC. We make sure that the Black RSOs under us are doing what they're supposed to do as far as serving students and running professionally. And we also host, organize, and run the Black graduation at the end of each spring semester, along with organizing a few events at the beginning of each fall semester for students to feel a welcoming environment coming from different areas of the country. And that's all that I have to share as far as this fund and what my organization is. I'm also part of USG, which is the undergraduate student government, but I wanted to give a chance for anyone for like maybe 2 or 3 questions if you do have a specific question before you think about donating or helping sponsor us or spreading the word. You could take the opportunity now. I'll just pick you if you raise your hand. Yes. Well, last year, yeah, so she asked, do we know about how many students used the resource last year when we made it available? So there were at least 50 students that used it because we had about $5,000. So, and all those funds were used up, so we know that at least 50 students used it. Anything else? Okay, well, that means I did a good job explaining. Okay, yes, Isaac. Yes, so services are $10 per session. That's the copay that students have to pay. So after about 10 to 12 sessions, that's about $100 to $120 for each student. Okay, thank you guys so much for inviting me and letting me speak. Hope you guys have a great service.
Thank you, Grace, for coming and talking about that activity. And I do want to thank Isaac for bringing the fund to the attention of Social Action so it could be included in our Social Action monthly process. And I do want to thank all the members of the congregation who have been contributing during this month of January to the fund, and those who will do so in the next couple weeks. Today, we do in the service celebrate and reflect on the words and the work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And we'll lead off with a series of readings and reflections with Toby Sagan. So Toby, I'll invite you up and to start our message.
Good morning. It's really a pleasure to be here because I haven't been able to be in this building for about 2 years, and it's great to be here. First, I'm sharing the podium today with Lorraine Wright and Amy Weber. Neither of us are, or none of us are historians, nor claim any particular expertise in the life of Martin Luther King Jr. But we want to honor him by sharing some of the things that he said, the speeches he gave, the things that he wrote that talk to us. And we hope that they will help you. Several of us lived through that period and remember it, and some of us don't, but I hope this helps you understand Dr. King a little bit better. And I need my glasses. Martin Luther King Jr. was born in Atlanta, Georgia on January 15th, 1929. He graduated from Morehouse College in 1948, and then at that same year he was ordained into the Baptist ministry. He then entered theological seminary, and he began his studies of the work of Mahatma Gandhi, right? Receiving a PhD in theology from Boston University in June of 1955. I know many of you have heard the story of Rosa Parks and know that she was a seamstress, 42-year-old seamstress in Montgomery, Alabama. She was well regarded in her community. And apparently the story, and it's a true story, she was on a bus and refused to vacate her seat for a white man. And for that, she was arrested. A group of community leaders met and asked Dr. King if he would be the president of a new organization named the Montgomery Improvement Association, which would call for a boycott of all city buses. The boycott began on December 5th, the same day of Rosa Parks' trial. The bus boycott remained in effect for over 11 months until the Supreme Court declared Alabama's law on segregation of buses as unconstitutional. A story that became a watchword for the boycott goes like this. One cold morning, during the 10th month of a boycott, an elderly woman began her 4-mile walk to her job. Her slow progress led a passerby to inquire if her feet were tired. Her reply, "Yes, my friend, my feet is tired, but my soul is rested." Thus began Martin Luther King's history of nonviolence. I'm going to read you some of the excerpts what he said about nonviolence. We Southern Negroes believe that it is essential to defend the right of equality now. From this position, we will not and cannot retreat. Fortunately, we are increasingly aware that we must not try to defend our position by methods that contradict the aim of brotherhood. We in Montgomery believe that the only way to press on is by adopting the philosophy in practice of nonviolent resistance. Violence never solves problems. It only creates new and more complicated ones. If we succumb to the temptation of using violence in our struggle for justice, unborn generations will be the recipients of a long and desolate night of bitterness. And our chief legacy to the future will be an endless reign of meaningless chaos. The aftermath of nonviolence is reconciliation and the creation of a beloved community. A boycott is never an end within itself. It is merely a means to awaken a sense of shame within the oppressor. But the end of reconciliation, the end is redemption. Struggle is not so much the tension between white people and Negro people. The struggle is rather between justice and injustice, between the forces of light and the forces of darkness. In 1959, Dr. and Mrs. King spent a month in India studying Gandhi's techniques of nonviolence. In an attempt to build on the success of Montgomery, many people embraced different and more radical strategies to confront segregation. On February 1st, 1960, 4 Black college students started a sit-in at a local 5 and dime. Sit-ins were attempts to attack laws that prohibited African Americans from eating lunch at lunch counters or restaurants alongside whites. The movement spread among college students in 15 cities, and a race riot occurred during one of those sit-ins in Chattanooga, Tennessee. It isn't in this book, but I remember reading, and I've been to the Civil Rights Museum in Birmingham. The students were pelted had ketchup and mustard poured over their heads and milkshakes. They were taunted and, of course, verbally insulted. I'll read you what Dr. King has to say about the involvement of the students and civil disobedience. The students believe that he who openly disobeys a law conscience tells him is unjust, and then willingly accepts the penalty, gives the evidence thereby that he so respects the law and he belongs in jail until it is changed. Their appeal is to your conscience. Students appear to have perceived what an older generation overlooked in the rule of law. The law tends to declare rights. It does not deliver them. They have offered their energies and their bodies to effect this result. Indeed, these students are not struggling for themselves alone. They are seeking to save the soul of America. They are taking our whole nation back to those great wells of democracy, which were dug deep by the founding fathers in the formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. In sitting down at lunch counters, they are in reality standing up for the best in the American dream. The Freedom Rider movement was the next major effort to undo segregationist laws. This new phase of the civil rights movement met violent opposition. On May 4th, 1961, the first group of Freedom Riders, intent on integrating interstate buses, left Washington, D.C. on a Greyhound bus. Shortly after, the Supreme Court had already outlawed segregation on interstate transport. The bus was bombed and burned outside Anniston, Alabama, and the riders themselves were attacked and beaten in Anniston, Birmingham, and Montgomery. They were arrested later in Jackson, Mississippi. Dr. King himself was arrested many times during the early 60s. In April 1963, he was arrested in Birmingham while participating in a sit-in. He had recently become the recipient of criticism from several of his colleagues who wanted the battle for integration to continue in local and federal courts. Some of them felt that he was going too fast, too far, warning that King's silent resistance would incite civil disturbances. Lorraine Wright will read excerpts from Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail and offer some insight on Birmingham and Alabama during the early 60s.
Good morning. Before I read from the excerpts from the letter from the Birmingham jail that he wrote in April 1963, I want to tell you a little bit about my personal experiences living in Birmingham during the time. We started out, my family, my parents and I started out in Buffalo, New York. And when I was 7, we moved to Fort Worth, Texas. That was Lyndon Baines Johnson, Texas then. So things were friendly and much more open and together, unlike today, of course. And then when I was 13, we moved to Birmingham, Alabama, and that was 1957. And it was like, this was very hard for me to think back, to recall these things. It was like being dropped into a foreign country where the words, the ugly, the whole situation of diversity, of awful segregation became immediately apparent to us when we moved there. We were Yankees, of course, and we weren't very welcomed just from that. The first thing I remember as a child, 13, was of what situation we were in was Mom and I wanted to go downtown on the bus, and we lived, of course, in a white neighborhood because that's where whites lived. We belonged to a white church because there were no integrated churches. And of course, the high school that I went to, the junior high and high school, it was all white too. We got on the bus anyway to go over the mountain where we lived south of town, down into the downtown. And Mom and I in Texas always liked to sit at the back of the bus, and that's where we went. We just strolled down the aisle and sat down there. And I remember to this day the bus driver screaming at us, "Y'all can't go back there. You have to sit in the front." And Mom and I looked at each other, and people were staring. And we went to the front and sat down. And one of the white women turned to my mother and said, "Where are y'all from?" And so Mom and I, it was really discouraging. And of course, when we wound up downtown, we discovered immediately separate drinking fountains, exactly alike, right next to each other, and the word colored on one and white on the other. We discovered almost immediately there were, if you go into Woolworths, for example, there were no black clerks to wait on you. It was all white. When you stood at the bus station bus stop to go home, the blacks stayed down a little bit away from you and from where the whites were waiting for the bus. And of course, the whites got on the bus first. Restrooms, I mean, the signs, white ladies over here, and then way over here, colored ladies. And I wrote down a few other things I remember or looked up. For example, downtown, the Imperial Laundry had a billboard on the side of its building that said, "We wash for white people only." There was another sign down there, "No dogs, Negroes, or Mexicans." In movie theaters, of course, as I understand, here in Carbondale, the same thing, blacks in the 50s, the blacks went up into the balcony through a separate entrance, so you never had to interact with anybody, and they were up in the balconies. Taxi cabs, white cabs, black cabs. And even though in school, you made a pledge of allegiance to the flag, the American flag, the US flag, I don't recall anything other than, besides that, anything other than Dixie Confederate flags everywhere. The only black person that I remember, I've really thought hard, that I ever talked to in my 4 years there was the next door neighbor. They had a black housekeeper. And sometimes she would stand there, I'd get home from school, walk home from school, and she'd be there waiting for someone to pick her up. And I would talk to her a little bit there. She had a little son. That's the only person ever that I ever was in a presence of to talk to who was black. I would watch we lived on the side of a long sloping hill. And from the desk in my bedroom, I could watch the walking of the black maids as they went down to the bus station at the end of the day, the nannies. And I thought to myself, something's wrong here. This doesn't seem right. So I wanted to bring you, however, up to 1961, just like Toby said, the announcement that things were going to heat up in Birmingham. The first sign of that was in our church. I belonged to the Lutheran church, and our minister kept us after church one day, and he said, "There's been a rumor that a black couple will try to go into the Baptist church down the road. And I want to tell you that if that sort of thing happens here, we will be welcoming. But just to warn you," it was a warning, "this may happen and it might cause a problem." And then the other thing was, as the national news, of course, everybody listened to the national news because we didn't have any other source of information, and they started to cover Birmingham, now the national news. And when we heard of the Freedom Riders that were coming, they called a school assembly. This was junior year. And I remember them saying, there may be a lot of violence. We may have some protests out in front. Just be ready. And I remember Chet Huntley was supposed to be coming down. And I remember especially there was a boy sitting beside me, and he turned to me and he said, "It's you Yankees that are causing all this trouble. I wish you Yankees would just go home and leave us alone." So that was it was just a scary time and an incredible time when you think back. And one more thing, the man who kept all of this going, Bull Connor, if that's a name that anybody remembers, he ran the police department, the fire department in Birmingham. And it was, he was keeping these, even though the Supreme Court and all of the laws in Alabama had changed to integrate the buses and everything. He was determined that Birmingham would not do that. He was going to die on that sword. I want to read you then a little excerpts from Dr. Martin Luther King that he wrote from the letter from Birmingham jail, April 16th, 1963, to the 8 white ministers there who had urged him to wait and be patient and not to cause trouble. He wrote, "I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Its ugly record of brutality is widely known. We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. We still creep at horse and buggy pace toward gaining a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. Perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill your Black brothers and sisters, when you suddenly find your speech stammering as you seek to express to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, when you are humiliated by nagging signs reading white and colored, when your first name becomes nigger, your middle name becomes boy, and your last name becomes John, and your wife and mother are never given the respected title Mrs., when you are forever fighting a desegregating, denigrating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. I hope the church as a whole will meet the challenge of this decisive hour. But even if the church does not come to the aid of justice, I have no despair about the future. We will reach the goal of freedom in Birmingham and all over the nation, because the goal of America is freedom. Abused and scorned though we may be, our destiny is tied up with America's destiny. Before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth, we were here. If the inexpressible cruelty of slavery could not stop us, the opposition we now face will surely fail. One day the South will recognize its real heroes. They will be the James Merediths with a noble sense of purpose that enables them to face jeering and hostile mobs. They will be the old, oppressed, battered Negro women. They will be the young high school and college students, the young ministers of the gospel, courageously and not violently sitting at lunch counters. Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away. And in some not too distant future, tomorrow the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all their scintillating beauty.
On August 28, 1963, the first large integrated protest, the March on Washington, was held in Washington, D.C. Dr. King and other civil rights leaders met with President Kennedy, and afterwards, Dr. King delivered his I Have a Dream speech at the Lincoln Memorial. The speech is often remembered by the repetition of the words, I have a dream, statements that it contains. But I have chosen a different paragraph to read today. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as citizens of color are concerned. He was talking about the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. He thought that was a promissory note to all men, yes, Black and as well as white, and that they would all be guaranteed the inalienable rights of liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Now is the time to make real promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all God's children. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to a distrust of all white people, for many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny, and that, I can see, and they have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. This offense we share, mounted to storm the battlement of injustice, must be carried forth by a biracial army. We cannot walk alone. In August 1964, the bodies of 3 young civil rights workers were discovered buried in a farm near Philadelphia, Mississippi. And on December 10th of the same year, Dr. King received the Nobel Prize, Peace Prize in Oslo, Norway. 1965 and 66 were turbulent times. It is impossible to discuss in detail the protests and the challenges to the concept of nonviolence. The rise of Black Power, the onset of race riots, the response to the Vietnamese War, and continuous unrest within the country, as well as the achievements of the civil rights movement in the time we have here this morning. Some highlights. March 7th, 1965, a group of demonstrators are beaten while attempting to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge on a planned march to Montgomery, Alabama from Selma. Alabama's Governor George Wallace had prohibited the march. March 9th, Unitarian minister James Reeb is beaten by 4 white segregationists in Selma and died 2 days later. March 15th, President Johnson introduces the voting rights bill. He will submit to Congress and uses the slogan, "We shall overcome." March 21st through 25th, over 3,000 protest marchers leave Selma for a march to Montgomery, protected by federal troops. They were joined along the way by a total of 25,000. August 6th, the voting rights bill is signed by President Johnson. By 1966, Dr. King had become a vocal critic of the war in Vietnam. He read an anti-war statement at a Washington rally on March 27th, 1967. And on March 27th, 1967, he made a public declaration as he led an anti-war demonstration in Chicago. A few years ago, there was a shining moment in the struggle. It seemed as if there was a real promise of hope for the poor, both Black and white. Through the poverty program, there were experiments, hopes, new beginnings. Then came the buildup in Vietnam, and I watched the program broken and eviscerated as if it were some idle political plaything of a society gone mad on war. And I knew that America would never invest the necessary funds or energies in rehabilitation of its poor so long as adventures like Vietnam continue to draw men and skills and money like some demonic, destructive suction tube. Perhaps the most tragic recognition of reality took place when it became clear to me that the war was doing far more than devastating the hopes of the poor at home. It was sending their sons and their brothers and their husbands to fight and to die in extraordinarily high proportions relative to the rest of the population. We were taking the Black young men who had been crippled by our society and sending them thousands of miles away to guarantee liberties in Southeast Asia, which they had not found in Southwest Georgia or in East Harlem. So we have been repeatedly faced with the cruel irony of watching Negro and white boys on TV screens as they kill and die together for a nation that has been unable to seat them together in the same schools. So we watch them in brutal, solitary burning the huts of poor village, but we realized they would never live on the same block in Detroit. I could not be silent in the face of such cruel manipulation of the poor. In January 1967, Dr. King writes his book, Where Do We Go From Here? And in November, he announces the formation of the Poor People's Campaign with the aim of representing the problems of poor Blacks and whites. He writes, a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social justice is approaching spiritual death. True compassion is more than flinging coin to a beggar. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. He believed that organized labor would increase its importance in the destinies of Negroes. Amy Weber will tell us more of his thoughts on labor and economic power.
Good morning. I'd like to share with you some of Dr. King's words and actions as they relate to the civil rights movement and its intersection with the labor movement. My source is a book of his writings and speeches edited by Michael K. Honey entitled All Labor Has Dignity. That title is a quote from Dr. King, and it resonated with me particularly at this time of pandemic, when a movement has begun to give essential workers, who are often people of color, the respect and fair treatment they deserve. Essential workers have jobs that can't be done from home and that are essential to the function of society. For example, people who work in hospitals and people who drive the buses that get them there. Dr. King talked about the need for working people to earn a living wage, and we're still talking about that today. I'm going to skip some of the historical overview that I was going to share and move to the background of the events leading up to the Memphis sanitation workers strike that brought Dr. King to Memphis at the end of his life. While King traveled the country rousing support for the Poor People's Campaign, a civil rights strike broke out in Memphis, Tennessee. On February 12, 1968, President Lincoln's birthday, some 1,300 Black men walked away from their jobs picking up garbage for the city. Ethel Cole, 36, and Robert Walker, 30, had been crushed to death by a defective packing mechanism on a truck in a city that refused to spend the money to update its equipment, leaving their families with no insurance or even workers' compensation. The city also sent home workers with no pay when it rained and made them work extra hours without pay when it didn't. They worked in filth and had nowhere to clean up, suffered terrible injuries, and were treated by whites as boys, almost as servants during slavery times, all for minimum wages. Working full-time jobs, Black sanitation workers lived in poverty and could not adequately feed their families. They felt union rights and recognition, dues checkoff, and some degree of job security provided the only solution. but the city's conservative white mayor, Henry Loeb, refused to even consider it. And now here is part of Dr. King's speech in Memphis to sanitation strikers and their supporters. It's not the one he gave the night before his assassination, which you may have heard before, but one he gave 2 weeks earlier on March 18th, 1968. And I just want to add in another part of this speech, not the passage I'm going to read, but another part. He kind of lists all the successes that the movement had had in desegregation, and he makes the point that what good is it to have the right to sit at a lunch counter if you can't afford to order anything. So he says to the strikers and their supporters, "You are doing many things here in this struggle. You are demanding that this city will respect the dignity of labor. So often we overlook the work and the significance of those who are not in professional jobs, of those who are not in the so-called big jobs. But let me say to you tonight that whenever you are engaged in work that serves humanity and is for the building of humanity, it has dignity and it has worth. One day, our society must come to see this. One day, our society will come to respect the sanitation worker if it is to survive. For the person who picks up our garbage in the final analysis is as significant as the physician, for if he doesn't do his job, diseases are rampant. All labor has dignity. But you are doing another thing. You are reminding not only Memphis, but you are reminding the nation that it is a crime for people to live in this rich nation and receive starvation wages. And I need not remind you that this is our plight as a people all over America. The vast majority of Negroes in our country are still perishing on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. My friends, we are living as a people in a literal depression. Now, you know, when there is mass unemployment and underemployment in the Black community, they call it a social problem. When there is mass unemployment and underemployment in the white community, they call it a depression. But we find ourselves living in a literal depression all over this country as a people. Now, the problem is not only unemployment. Do you know that most of the poor people in our country are working every day? And they are making wages so low that they cannot begin to function in the mainstream of the economic life of our nation. These are facts which must be seen, and it is criminal to have people working on a full-time basis and a full-time job getting part-time income. You are here tonight to demand that Memphis will do something about the conditions that our brothers face as they work day in and day out for the well-being of the total community. You are here to demand that Memphis will see the poor.
On April 3rd, I guess the same year, 1964, Dr. King's speech, "I've Been to the Mountain," is delivered in Memphis.
All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right. And so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
This is a CBS News special report.
Dan Rather reporting for CBS News from New York. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was shot to death by an assassin late today as he stood on a balcony in Memphis, Tennessee. Dr. King had planned to lead another civil rights march in Memphis next Monday. We got the latest on the story now from Russ Hodge, news director of WREC-TV.
Has anybody here seen my old friend Abraham? Can you tell me where he's gone? He freed a lot of people, but it seems the good they die young. You know, I just looked around and he's gone. Has anybody here seen my old friend John? Can you tell me where he's gone? He freed a lot of people, that seems the good they just die young. I just looked around and he's gone.
Toby and Lorraine and Amy and Bob and Karen for a wonderful message. And I'm just going to editorialize for a moment the right that underpins many of the other rights that Dr. King talked about is the right to vote. And the suppression of the right to vote is shameful. A few announcements before we close. Next Sunday, the 23rd, reaching reasonable conclusions. How can reasonable people come to unreasonable conclusions? We're surrounded by a major divergence of beliefs in the media, in our personal relationships. So we need to explore the sources of that divergence and find ways to see worth and dignity in others. And Jerry Malumbi will lead us in that exploration. I want to thank Bob and Karen for great music this morning. Again, Toby, Amy, Lorraine, wonderful message. Thank you so much. Thanks to TK and Martha for doing the AV really well. We're getting really good at it. Thanks to Rhonda for leading the Sunday Services Committee and planning this and other services. Thanks to our greeters. Amy, I think, was a greeter, and I think Laura helped out as a greeter as well. And thank you, Grace, for coming, joining us this morning to tell us about the work of this team. And of course, thanks to everybody who's here and everybody who's on Zoom for joining in this service. Again, if you're a newcomer, please fill out our blue card, or if you're on Zoom, in the chat, provide your contact information so that we can keep in touch with you. And now for our blessing. This is A Power at Work in the Universe by the Reverend Thomas Shade. My friends, there is a power at work in the universe. It works through human hands, but it's not made by human hands. It is a creative, sustaining, and transforming power, and we can trust that power with our lives. It will sustain us whenever we take a stand on the side of love, whenever we take a stand for peace and justice. Blessed be, go in peace with love for justice.